Monsieur le Président, thank you so much for speaking to CNBC during your trip here in London. So you were president between 2012 and 2017, but you have made the unusual decision to come back to politics just after the snap election was called. So tell us why you decided to come back into politics.
Je n'avais pas prévu de nouveau être.
I had not planned to be a candidate again in a position that I have held before being president, Member of Parliament for the Corrèze region, which is dear to me. But after President Macron's decision to dissolve the National Assembly was made with a very serious threat that the far right could win, I considered that I myself had to set an example, and also so that the French left could be rebalanced between the one I support, the socialist reformist left, the radical left, more incantatory, but which does not seem to me to represent a chance of success for the next elections.
So you want to make yourself useful in politics, and yet you're in a coalition with the far left. And I want to quote your book just here. You mentioned that the left has a problem. Its measured successes are thwarted by deleterious divisions, as if the left has no worse enemy than itself. So I want to know, is the left learning from its past mistakes? And do you think the coalition that you are in is learning those lessons?
Non, la gauche ne retient pas les leçons de l'histoire. C'est pour ça que j'ai.
No, the left does not learn the lessons of history. That is why I wrote this book, because the lesson is we must do everything for unity. The union of voters who want change, but there can only be victory if the reformist left, the realistic left, the left that wants to govern is stronger and even much stronger than the radical left. That in an election, depending on the circumstances, there is a need to make defensive electoral alliances. Yes, I accepted them. But to govern, to first win and then to govern, the reformist left must be the strongest.
Gouverner, il faut que la gauche réformiste soit la plus forte.
So we, just 2.5 years before the next presidential election, would you consider then running? If you can gather the forces behind you before this kind of centrist kind of left that you represent, would you be ready to run again in a presidential election?
Ce n'est pas le calendrier que j'ai posé.
This is not the timetable that I have set. The timetable is first to rebuild the socialist force, the main force. Then to work on a program that can not only give the left element that will convince, but to go and find voters who are in the centre with Emmanuel Macron in particular, and who are disappointed by what happened, in order to constitute a possible majority to win, and then to govern. The question of the personality that will ultimately have to be the one to embody this, it is too early to say. And if I myself, who have already been president, took this step to convince, I am not sure that I would succeed. It is precisely because I am not talking about the candidacy for the Élysée that I can give this lead for the reconstruction of the left of government.
So let's zoom in on the French economy and the current debate around the budget. Just yesterday, MPs massively rejected the draft budget with a lot of amendments that were put forward by the left-wing bloc. So now it's going back to the Senate, stripped from all these amendments. Can a consensus be reached between the two chambers, potentially, to reach an agreement on that budget?
Non, il n'y aura pas de
No, there will be no compromise, and that is why there will be what we call in France a 49.3 procedure to pass the budget. I also think that this procedure, which is not necessarily easy to accept for part of public opinion, should already have been implemented. There is no point in having an assembly, in this case the National Assembly, discuss for days and days when we know that there will be no agreement in the end.
If there is a 49.3, that means the government pushing through the budget without a vote, that means there is a vote of no confidence after. Will you vote against a Barnier government? How long do you think that Barnier government can survive?
Le gouvernement Barnier ne tient aujourd'hui que parce que
the Barnier government is only holding today because the far right does not want to bring it down. He was appointed, Mr. Barnier, a person I respect, but he was appointed by Emmanuel Macron precisely because the National Rally authorised him to govern. From there, I do not think that the National Rally will bring him down at the end of the year. And if the National Rally were to decide at some point to break with Mr. Barnier, there would also be a question to ask the socialist. What is the point, the meaning of bringing down this government, unless we have a solution to propose to the French? I am in favour of respecting the deadlines, that is to say, to allow a government to work, and especially so that the socialists can reconstitute themselves, we must allow time. But it is up to us to judge. What is to be feared is cracks within his own majority, in his bloc, and we see them appearing between the Republican and the former supporters of Mr. Macron. And the other risk for Mr. Barnier is the social movements that are developing at the moment in France, given the choices that are being made.
And so you just said that the far right holds the key to this government, whether it survives or not. Are you concerned about the influence that the far right has on French politics as a consequence?
Oui, il y a une influence.
Yes, there is already an influence. The best proof is that Mr. Barnier's government is already announcing a law on immigration, while the previous one was voted just a few months ago and the ink is not even dry yet, and it's announced there'll be more measures. So yes, I think that the far right is influencing the government's actions.
May I ask you specifically on the French economy? Deficit, there's ballooning above 6%, debt above 110% of GDP, the credit agencies downgrading the outlook for France. What do you think went wrong? What's your assessment on the public finances and what do you think went wrong?
Il y a eu beaucoup d'erreurs qui ont été commises depuis 2017, depuis que j'ai quitté.
There have been many mistakes made since 2017, since I left the Elysée. That is to say, tax cuts that were not financed, both for businesses and for the most privileged individuals. And then there was a failure to regulate spending, especially after the health crisis when other countries had reduced the flow of spending much more severely. And finally, the dissolution did not help matters, since the country has not been governed for almost 6 months. So that largely explains the deficit, but it must be corrected, and if we were in government ourselves, we would have to do it. When I arrived at the Elysée in 2012, I myself found a situation that was more or less equivalent, with quite considerable deficits, and we reduced them. It is quite paradoxical that it is the left that did the best management of public finances compared to the right.
Let's shift to international politics. We've seen the re-election of Donald Trump going back to the White House. Some observers think that the Democrats lost because they failed to grasp what the workers wanted and to address their needs and their concerns. Is that an analysis that you share? And are there any lessons from the election that you think might be useful even for your own party or for left-wing parties elsewhere?
Les populistes essayent de faire croire aux classes.
Populists try to make the popular classes, the working classes, believe that by being protected, by having closed borders, they will be able to keep their jobs. It is a mystification. If the global economy shrinks, if everyone puts customs duties on their borders, there will be a loss of growth, a loss of investment. But it is true that the Democrats did not argue that what they had to do was support the purchasing power of the working class, and therefore propose a better redistribution. Finally, the mistake of the Democrats made against the populists who exalted American pride was to not propose, in addition to categorical solutions, a wider project for the whole of American society, and not simply on democracy. Democracy is necessary, but it is not in itself a political project.
The first mandate of Donald Trump was quite disruptive to Europe when it comes to tariffs or NATO, etc. It looks like he will have even more power this time. How concerned should Europe be about a return of Trump to the White House next year?
L'Europe doit s'inquiéter, mais l'Europe c'est aujourd'hui.
Europe must be worried, but Europe is today a continent that is not united. So what will be absolutely essential is the reaction to what Trump wants to do, particularly the US disengaging from the European continent. This is what France, Germany, Poland and the United Kingdom, the 4 main countries that invest in defence, will do. If these 4 countries react together, both in relation to the security issue, the Ukraine issue and even the trade issue, then Europe will be respected. Otherwise it will be pushed aside.
And do you think they can? I mean, now Germany is caught in their own electoral cycle coming very soon, the left struggling in a coalition. Do you think Europe can come together?
Quels que soient les gouvernements, en France il est faible.
Whatever the government, in France it is weak, in Germany it has fallen. Whatever the governments, there must be a broad political consensus in these 2 countries to firmly resist what Donald Trump may undertake. Myself as a former president and as a responsible person, a member of the National Assembly, I will engage with the French government so that it holds firm.
Je m'engagerai auprès du gouvernement français pour qu'il tienne bon.
And how about the potential impact on Ukraine and the Middle East? What's your analysis of potentially having Trump in the White House? Can Europe gather, to continue to support Ukraine? What does that mean for tensions in the Middle East, potential escalation with strikes in Iran? Like, what's your view on what things could look like next year with Trump in the White House?
De mon expérience de Donald Trump, puisque nous avons eu quelques mois à travailler.
From my experience with Donald Trump, since we had a few months of working together, I take away one conclusion. What Donald Trump says, he does. He says that he will resolve the Ukrainian question in 3 days. He will try to propose a peace with Putin that will exclude Ukraine from the negotiation and will allow Putin to take the territories he already occupies. Are we going to let it happen? We must not let it happen. because it would set an extremely serious precedent where force has prevailed over law. And in the Middle East, what Donald Trump says is that he will support Netanyahu's offensive to the end. And so we must say that it would be a risk of deflagration in the region and with a possible war with Iran. Do we want it? Do we not want it? And would Arab countries be ready to let themselves be guided by an America that would go too far?
There is a France-Israel game tomorrow in France. I understand that you will be attending, as well as Nicolas Sarkozy, also the other former president. President Macron intending to send a message of fraternity and solidarity with Jewish people after the violence we saw in Alsace a few days back. Of course, France is the home of the biggest Jewish and Muslim communities in Europe. So all these tensions reverberate very strongly in France. Some people from the LFI in your coalition, the far-left party, want to say this game should be cancelled. Why are you attending this game, and are you worried of potential clashes?
Annuler le match aurait été considéré qu'il y avait des.
Cancelling the match would have meant considering the risks of serious incidents that could occur, and which would justify not holding this match. It would have been a renunciation. But what I want to do by being present at the match is to tell the spectators, those who love football and who do not want to see French Jews who are not responsible for Mr. Netanyahu's policy being blamed, that they can come to the stadium as they wish, and therefore ensure them not just protection, but solidarity as well.
Pas simplement une protection, mais une solidarité aussi.
Final question from me. We are in London. There's a left-wing party that's come back to power, Keir Starmer. He says he wants to reset with the European Union. What advice would you give him, or are you hopeful of a reset between the UK and France and the rest of Europe?
Keir Starmer est dans une bonne position.
Keir Starmer is in a good position, and he is right to want to return to the European game without necessarily seeking to become a member again. But he is right to say that Europe needs the United Kingdom, that the United Kingdom needs Europe, precisely because we must be strong together. And this is perhaps a good time for the United Kingdom to return to the table with the Europeans and participate in certain decisions. Not all, but in particular on defence issues, on energy issues, on climate issues. We need the United Kingdom.
On a besoin du Royaume-Uni.
Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup.
Merci.